All right, welcome to Dr. B Music Theory. I'm going to go check and make sure everything's working with this stream, so give me one moment while I make sure we are up and running appropriately. It looks like we're in good shape, so I'm glad to welcome you all back. For those of you watching live, I would like this to be a little bit more interactive than we've done in the past. So you can see that I have some stuff up here on the board behind me. I'm going to be asking you to type in the chat Roman numeral analysis. So this is a good test. See if you can get that. All right. So welcome again. And this is going to be archived, so you can watch it later. You can watch it again. You can pause it and go listen to the things I'm referencing. So what I wanted to do is 2 weeks ago, someone was asking, why don't you talk more about melodic development? And why don't you talk more about melody in general? And it was an excellent question, and it really had me thinking. And so today I really wanted to start about talking about melody. And there was a group back in the 1970s, 1980s called ABBA, and they were from Sweden, but they had their songs in English, and they were international sensations. They kind of won the Eurovision Song Contest. And if any of you haven't seen the Will Ferrell movie that's came out recently about the Eurovision contest, it made me laugh a bunch of times, so I would recommend it. But anyway, so ABBA wrote some wonderful melodies. Any group that gets kind of like super popular has at least decent to awesome melodies. And that's because although when we're talking about music theory, we spend so much time talking about harmony, and certainly harmony is important. It sets a mood, it gives a certain feeling, an interpretation, but it's really the melody that listeners lock into. They don't leave the concert arpeggiating the harmonies. They leave a concert singing the melody. That's what we latch onto. And I don't want to diminish the importance of melody. I give this example to my students all the time. So imagine, if you will, you're watching a movie and there's a small child playing by the ocean, and you hear this. Again, beach, sunshine, ocean, and you hear this. That music is telling you how to emotionally interpret that scene, right? Those are just two chords going back and forth, but the emotions you should be feeling are probably like relaxation, maybe nostalgia, sense of peace. Now imagine, if you will, the exact same scene. Small child playing by the ocean, sun is shining, and instead the music you hear is just one chord, repeated in a very unique rhythmic fashion. Obviously, there's a completely different emotional interpretation. Now you know something's gonna happen. You're like on high alert. You know, like that kid's gonna get eaten by a shark at any minute now in the movie, right? That's the power of just harmony. But what I really want, we're gonna talk about harmony today, don't get me wrong, and that's why I said you can do a Roman numeral analysis, but we're gonna really focus on the melody and the melodic development. So, this is a song by ABBA, a group that was popular in the 1970s, 1980s. They were so popular that their music has kind of withstood the test of time, and not all popular music does. But in, I believe it was 1999, it was turned into a musical called Mamma Mia that was a big hit on Broadway, New York City, and then it toured. And then it was turned into a major motion picture movie starring like Meryl Streep and Pierce Brosnan, like top A-list actors. And all this was the soundtrack, was the music of ABBA. And in the movie, as well as one of their songs, there's a piece called "The Winner Takes It All." And that's the song I want to talk to you talk about with you today. So I put it up here. And there's a couple things that are interesting. This is not the complete song, right? But this is all the essential material. This is everything, and it's just a matter of repeating it and restructuring it in terms of how you get an entire like 5-minute song out of just this. And if we look at it, we're really talking about 16 measures of harmony, just 16 measures, and using a total of only 8 chords. And I'm counting as different chords when you have, let's say, A flat minor right here and A flat minor with E flat in the bass. I'm counting that as the same. I'm counting that as different chords because it's the inversions count, right? That's important. So with only 8 chords and only 16 measures of real material, they created a song that was an international hit that was, and their music as a whole spawned a musical, spawned a movie. It's in the movie, this song specifically. So let's take a look at this melody, right? And if we just take a look at right here, starting with these pickups. That then repeats itself, but it's the same material, but so I'm not going to repeat it right now. And then the next melodic part. And there you go. You got yourself a hit song. Now, I know there's many of you out there who are composers, songwriters, arrangers, and one of the things that you really should focus on is writing an awesome melody. It's so easy to get caught up in harmony, especially if you're trying to be a little more sophisticated, a little bit more elegant. You're a curious musician. You're interested in all different styles. Don't forget sight of the melody. The melody is going to be your most important thing as a songwriter, as a composer. Think, if you love your classical music, think Tchaikovsky, a master of melody. And so we're looking at it in a different genre here, but the elements of melody, the kind of building blocks and the tips are going to transfer across different styles. For those of you who are taking music theory, you're musicians, you're getting ready for an exam, or perhaps you're in college and or AP music theory, you're in high school taking advanced placement classes, and you need to be able to analyze melodies because sometimes that's asked of you. This is going to be a great way for you to kind of apply that knowledge in a different style. So let's take a look. We have scale, slightly different rhythm, and then big leap, right? So one of the big things that we talk about with melodies is the relationship, the ratio between stepwise motion, meaning going up or down a scale, and a leap. If you have all up and down a scale, it's going to be boring. It's not going to be exciting. It's not going to be interesting. If it's all leaps, it's going to be distracting and confusing. So getting the balance right of the number of leaps to the number of steps. And so let's just take a look at what ABBA did here. So we have a leap, one leap right here. Then we have more, this is all scale. Then we have a little leap, right? A little leap between this A flat and the C flat. Just a little bit of a leap. So sometimes a third is considered a step. It functions more like a step in terms of how melody is created, and sometimes it functions as a leap. So if we're going like an arpeggio, and arpeggios will often sound like stepwise motion. They don't feel like they're creating this open space, this kind of vacuum, which is kind of what a leap does, that then wants to be filled. So if you're just going up an arpeggio, that's a leap of a third. Doesn't really sound like a leap, right? It's kind of that halfway in between. It's kind of more close to feeling like a step. In this case, we have a chord change. So this one actually feels more like a leap, this A flat to C flat. So we have this. But it's not a big leap. Not a big leap at all. So it doesn't have quite the same feel. And then we go da 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 da, and then again this kind of sort of leap right here. So I'm going to put that in parentheses because it's not super obvious as a leap. Now, here's where it gets interesting. We step up and then we have a giant leap. A leap of a seventh. Now, most of the time, a leap of the seventh is too big. It's a dissonant leap. And so for certain styles of music, so if you're in your Johann Sebastian Bach chorale style of writing, the leap of a seventh is going to stand out too much, and you avoid those dissonant leaps. Usually you'd only have a leap of a sixth, a major sixth or a minor sixth. But different genres have different permutations. There's a lot that's in common, but there are differences. So here, one of those differences is this leap of a seventh is not only is very striking and it sounds great. So it's loud, but we have this big leap, da 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 da, and then we go down and we do another leap here. So this D flat to C flat is a leap of a seventh. This B flat to A flat is another leap of a seventh. This E flat to D flat is yet another leap of a seventh. And then finally right here, this note here, the sustained note, the C flat, we do have a leap of a seventh down to the D flat. Though that one right there doesn't kind of function as a leap because this is the kind of like the end of a phrase right here, this C flat, and then we have a rest, and then this is really a pickup, and it's just essentially the same melody we had pickup for the beginning. So if we look, there's a lot more stepwise motion in this melody than there are leaps. But the leaps are placed in key locations. They're sprinkled in there. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4 measures, then a little leap, 1, 2, 3, another little leap, big leap, 1, 2, big leap, 1, 2, big leap, then 1, 2, 3, 4, leap. So predominantly by step. I'm saying it again because it's important, but key places where we have a leap. Now, what's also really important when you're talking about melodic construction, and we're looking at how this song in particular utilizes that, is what happens right after the leap. We have big leap, and then it just stays there. And then as soon as we repeat that, and then we use a scale, and it fills in that vacuum that was created. So we have da 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 dum. It's like, that's a surprise, right? That leap. It's like, we're like ga da da da, big surprise, dum. And we just kind of stay there, and everyone kind of is like, ooh, surprise, but nothing's happening now. So it creates a certain emotion when you do that. We're going to talk about that as well, the emotion of the song. So the big leap is a surprise, and then the fact that it stays there kind of gives you this, like, it makes the listener kind of like perk up their ears and say, well, what's going to happen? We just had this surprise. What's next after the big surprise? Then you get what you would normally expect, which is after a big leap, you then step back in the opposite direction. So leap down, step up, and we kind of fill in that sonic space between the G flat and the B flat. We don't fill it in all the way, but we get pretty close. So we fill in that sonic space. We then have our scale. And then we kind of keep going on the scale, and the last part we already talked about that that A flat to C flat. But notice here, and let me tell you why this is in parentheses in case you were wondering. Depending on, this is the verse right here. Depending on what verse we're in, sometimes there's a pickup, sometimes it just starts there. So we put it in parentheses. You'll often see that in sheet music. So what that means is that sometimes it's a quarter rest, eighth rest with an eighth note on the and of 2, and sometimes it's just 2 beats rest. So notice we have rhythmically as well, because we want to analyze a melody. Melody is not just pitches, melody is also rhythm. So rest on 1, 2, pick up, dum, da dum, and this dotted 8th, 16th note is just a little bit of variety, so it's not just eighth notes, to give it a little bit of, it's almost like a little like, almost like a trip and fall, right? Da da dum, trip fall, which is kind of a really neat way to do it. So 2 beats rest, 3 and 4, and then E1, and then we do the same rhythm, da da dum dum, and then we change what happens. But notice that this cell is the exact same as this. 2 beats rest, there. And if we, depending on which verse we are on, we have another 2 beats rest, and then dot, 3 and 4 and, which is, here we just they keep it straight, right? Instead of doing da da dum da dum, which kind of, you know, again, we're looking for variety. We've established da dum bum ba dum, da da dum ba da dum, da 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 dum. So it keeps it a little straighter. Now, to be fair, when you listen to the recordings, this is kind of like the very notated version that's very kind of rigid. When it's sung, there are performance liberties taken with the exact rhythm. It's not always metronomic exactly this rhythm. A good performer is going to, they're gonna kind of anticipate some notes, and they might sing certain note values shorter than that's written. They might also delay and backphrase certain things. So they might make certain notes a little bit longer than they're written. And this is one of the things that kind of creates a unique style, and it has a huge effect on the emotion of the song. So we're talking about the rhythm in a more general sense than an exact specific sense. And you can, you know, for those of you that are watching this after the live video is over, you know, go ahead and pause the recording and go listen to the song. There's a couple different versions worth listening to. There's the official video version, there's a live version by ABBA, and then you can also go ahead and compare it to the Meryl Streep version that's from the movie Mamma Mia of this song. So you have a couple things you can listen to so you can kind of hear exactly what I'm talking about from the actual recording. But getting back to that rhythm, 2 beats rest, da-da-dum, da-dum, 2 beats rest, ba-da-dum, ba-da-dum, 2 beats rest, da-da-da-da-dum, 2 beat rest, da-da-da-da-dum. It's very predictable in this sense. The rhythms, there's not a lot of variety. So for those of you composing melodies, it's really easy to make something way more complicated than it should be. Now, I'm not saying this is complicated. This is definitely not complicated. And I'm not saying you can't be more complicated than this, but there's something worth exploring as a composer in figuring out how you can make something that's simple sound good. The elegance of simplicity, the beauty of simplicity. There's something to that that is absolutely worth exploring as a composer. So don't be afraid of repetition, especially when you're composing a melody. Notice that da-da-da-da-dum, the rhythm is pretty much the same, but the melody is different. Ba-da-da-dum. It goes up again, but it's at a different level. So the first one is, and the second one is, and then we do, so these two went up, then this one goes down. So you're taking this, here's kind of like one of the secrets to writing a great melody. You make at least one aspect simple, and then you make something else is where you put your complexity. So if we take the music of Tchaikovsky, as I mentioned before, classical composer, wrote the Nutcracker, Swan Lake, Sleeping Beauty. Walt Disney realized how great his melodies were and took those and put them in the Disney movies. Great melodies. So his melodies were he'd repeat them over and over. And if you just had the melodies alone, you'd be like, gosh, Tchaikovsky, why are you so famous? Can you come up with something different? But if you listen carefully, in the background, every time that melody happens, there's something else happening behind it. There's a counter melody, or there's a different way in which the chords are being performed, or there's different harmonies under the same melody. So Tchaikovsky takes something that a listener can latch onto, a reasonably simple melody, and then puts all the complexity in other areas. And even within your melody, what you can do is you can say, I'm going to do something simple. I'm going to take this rhythm of 2 beats rest, ba-da-da-da-dum, 2 beats rest, ba-da-da-da-da-dum, little variation, right? 2 beats, ba-da-da-da-dum, 2 beats, ba-da-da-da-dum. But once you've done that and you've said, I'm going to have this one area that's simple, then you figure out how much variety can you get within that simplicity. So this first one starts on a D flat. This second one is exactly the same thing, going up the scale, the exact same rhythm, but starting on B flat. This one is kind of like the inversion. So the other one went up, this one goes down, and then it goes down again. But here the rhythm gets varied a little bit. So this is kind of like the same thing, but the rhythm gets varied. So we have an almost exact repetition. Then they go back and they do this whole thing again. And then this is where the art of the performance comes in, because the performer is going to then even give other variations to this. And we haven't even started talking about the lyrics yet, right? Because the lyrics are going to make a huge difference. Right now, I want to just focus in on the melody sides, the musical side. And I think it's worth just kind of being clear. When we're talking about a song, we're talking about a combination of art forms. We're talking about the art of music, which deals with pitch, rhythm, harmony, things like that. And we're talking about the art of literature, the lyrics, the poetry. These are two things that, you can look at separately, but in a good song, kind of become inseparable. But I do think, when I say music, that we can pull those two things apart. So I wanted to focus on just the music side of the song before we start talking about the lyrics. So this all gets repeated. Wonderful. Then after all this kind of like more kind of calm, it's got a narrow range. It's not a wide range. It goes down to A flat and up to G flat. So it's a minor seventh in terms of range. And then all of a sudden we have this huge dramatic leap up. The only big leap we've had is really just this one big leap here that goes down. But now we have a leap, and this was a leap down of a sixth. This is a leap up of a seventh. That tends to have this yearning quality when you have that leap up. And so it leaps up and then immediately steps back. So we'll leap up, step back. That's textbook how you write a melody. Then here's where 2 weeks ago someone was asking about melodic development. Well, melodic development has many ways you can do it. One is kind of the repetition aspects, the variation aspects we talked about within the verse. When we get here, when I start notating things with the red lead sheet symbols, this is the chorus. And so the chorus has this series, a sequence. We have and then it does it again. And then we finally have kind of like the wrapping it up. And do not underestimate the power of 3. This has been something that's been a big thing in music for centuries. 3 is like the greatest number in terms of how we hear things. We hear it once. Okay, it kind of has a surprise. Oh, what's going to happen? Then you hear it again, but at a different level, starting on the B flat. You're like, oh, okay, I get it. Third time's you've heard the expression, third time's the charm. This is kind of the same thing with music when you're composing. You get it a third time, and then finally you say, okay, after that it would start to become predictable. But 3 times just really works psychologically. First it's like question, answer, confirmation. It's almost like that kind of setup in terms of how it plays for the listener. So this wonderful sequence, this development of the melody as it shifts into different areas. So that's kind of a quick talk about that. Now let's see how the harmonies support it. Okay, And let me point out a couple things. So it starts off with an introduction, which is just the chords of the chorus. So let's think about this as in terms of songwriting, and if we can take principles. You can take the chords of the chorus, use them as an instrumental introduction. That way, when you get to the chorus, the listener is hearing a melody they've never heard, but they have this sense of familiarity that they get from the harmony. Music is like an amazing psychological tool. And I wonder to what extent you can, as human knowledge continues to evolve, that we figure out how music can be used to help us, help us feel better, relieve anxiety. Like, we all kind of implicitly know this. We all know that there's certain songs that will make us feel better, but to get deeper into that discovery. And I remember I was listening to an interview recently with an Olympic athlete, and he was talking about how, at one set of Olympics, he was listening to music that was all very, very energetic. And then his next Olympics, he was listening to all this kind of depressing, slow music. And he did terrible on the second Olympics. And in reflection, he's like, oh, I didn't know it at the time, but looking back, my mind wasn't there. I was like, listen, look, watch the, just look at the music I was listening to. I was just kind of in a funk. I was feeling down and my head wasn't in it. So of course I did not compete at the level that I did on my first Olympics. And so it was a whole psychological shift that happened, so that when it went to the third Olympics, he was able to win lots of gold medals. So this is also kind of reminds me of when you look at music history and you talk about ancient Greece. So 500 BC, long time ago, and they start talking about things like ethos. This idea that music can affect our character, not only our emotions, but our ethical, moral character as a human being. And there's certainly something to it, right? It's just like people say, you are what you eat. You kind of feel what you listen to as well. It does something when you're listening to a lot of music that has a certain feeling. Of course you're in that feeling, and that'll continue. So if you want to change how you feel, listen to different music. Think about when people go and typical workout music. Typical workout music is not like a ballad. It's more, it has a faster tempo, it has a certain kind of feel to it, because you're looking for a certain physiological as well as emotional result from that. So think about the ethos of a song and how these melodies will, and the types of melodies will affect that. So our introduction is the harmonies of the chorus. So the genius behind that is we hear an instrumental introduction, and then when we get to the chorus with the melody, which we haven't heard before, this melody for the chorus that's so striking with this ascending leap of a seventh, we have the familiarity of the chords. Then when we go to the verse, we have a different set of chords. They're both in the same key. This piece does not modulate. So it's one piece all in the key of G flat major. So there's not a lot of different harmonies, but it's more sophisticated than just 1, 4, 5. So let's take a look at what we have. And I'm going to look here in the chat here I'm going to take it. Normally I wait, but since I wanted a little bit more interaction, I'm going to take a look right now. So I'm going to take a little break, and then we're going to come back to it. All right. So good evening from England. Is he in California? I wonder if that's referring to my colorful shirt. I am not in California, but I would be happy to be in California. So anyways, I'm in New York State. Good evening from England. Thank you very much. Love England, visited London. And my biggest tip is if you're in London and you haven't been to Lord Frederick Leighton's House Museum, he was a painter. I loved it. Go to it. It was wonderful. I saw lots of great musicals while I was in London. But thanks from England. Good evening. Hey, good evening to you, Andrew. Good evening, morning from New Zealand. Ah, that's a place I haven't visited, but want to visit. From Sri Lanka. Woo, super cool. Another place I've never been, but need to go. Hello, so glad to catch this live again. Love from India. All right, love right back to you. Please don't forget the analysis of the Beethoven 7th Symphony Second Movement. Oh, thank you for the reminder. I have it written down somewhere, but I had forgotten about it. So I will get to that. Hi, is it necessary that we go back to the original key once we modulated? Can't we begin and end the piece in the second key? Please, I'm one of your... Hey, Pranev. I know, I saw, and I got a couple messages from you that I'm going to answer. Probably not today, but soon. Don't worry. It's going to all work out. It'll be great. So is it necessary we go back to the original key once we've modulated? Well, so I'm going to answer that. We don't modulate in this piece I'm analyzing. But in general, in music, the idea is that once you modulate, you do have to go back to where you started. And almost, kind of history shows that that's what the masters do. And so we should probably take a page from their book and do the same. The one big exception is where sometimes a piece will start in a minor key and it will end in either the parallel major or the relative major. And that the idea behind that is that it's like if it starts in C minor, you might end in E flat major or even C major. The idea that minor has more tension and is less at rest, less resolved than a major key. So the idea is like, well, what major key do you resolve in? Do you keep the same tonic note, C, C, and just make it C minor, C major, or do you keep the same key signature, C minor, E flat major? So sometimes you'll have something like that in terms of how you then modulate back. But modulating back is something you definitely need to do, usually to the same key you started in, but sometimes to something more resolved, the relative major or parallel major. Good question. Got Nolan saying, hey Nolan, I'm doing great this weekend. And Nolan is a student of mine taking Music Theory 1 at the college I teach, and he's working on his homework while he's listening to this stream. Hey, that's the great way to do it. Nolan Brennan, folks. He's a hard-working, passionate guitarist, so who knows? I'm hoping one day he's going to be super famous, and I'll be watching his YouTube channel. All right, how to use wide intervals while using music. Yeah, exactly. This is certainly one way to do it, right? And I think part of the reason that this chorus is so effective with the wide leaps is that you only had one really wide leap at the beginning and then lots of scales. Everyone's feeling comfortable, and then all of a sudden, boom, surprise, big leap. And then it resolves, and then boom, surprise again. But it's the same shape. It's the same melodic shape. So it's a surprise from the leap side, but there's some familiarity, and then surprise again, the same shape, same leap. Each time it's going to become a little less surprising because we start to hear that pattern of the sequence. So that's one way you can use wide leaps. Set up a sequence so that you have, kind of get everyone comfortable, hit them with a big leap, step back right away, then do that same big leap with the same kind of rhythmic feel, then do it one more time, a third time's the charm. That's one way you can use wide leaps. So yeah, that's a great rule of three. Great tip. Yes, thank you. All right, we got our analysis. All right, so we've got 1, which is correct, and these 2 slashes here mean that the chord stays, G flat stays for 2 beats. Then B flat 7 over D, and we have that being 5. All right, Caleb, I'm gonna have to say it's a good attempt, but not 100% on. 5, 6. Maybe you're analyzing this part right here. Yeah, I think you are. Yeah. That's what you're doing. All right, I got you. You're analyzing the verse. That's great. Okay, so 1, 1. I agree, and I'm going to go ahead and put in these Roman numerals now. So let's talk about it. Because us music theory folks, we love our harmonies and we love our Roman numeral analysis. So 1 chord, and it stays. That's what this line with dots means. repeat what it was in the last measure, so I'm going to just write it once. This is a 5 chord in first inversion. This goes to a 2 chord in second inversion, so 2, 6, 4. And then 5, 7. So 100% correct. Excellent, excellent. I want to talk a little bit about that, just since Caleb did a great job analyzing there. 1 chord. Then we go to, not only is it harmonically important that we look at what's going on there, also the bass line. Descending bass line is like, especially in popular music, but in all styles of music, is like the power of the scale is something I talk about. So for those of you who haven't watched all of my lesson videos, and I've got like, I don't know, 40 of them or something, they are in order of complexity. So I start off, lesson 1 is like pretty basic. Lesson 2 builds upon lesson 1, 3, 4, 5, etc., etc., etc. So some of the things I might be talking about in this video, you might not understand yet. So there might be a hole in your learning, or you might not have quite gotten to that level. I urge everyone to watch my lesson videos in order. Lessons 1, 2, 3. So everything that's called lesson is meant to be heard in specific order. Then all the kind of topics I'm doing now with the live Q&A, these are more of, just various topics that are built upon that knowledge of all those lessons. So when you have listened to all those lessons, you're going to really be able to understand and appreciate everything that's happening in these live Q&As when we talk about different topics. So check out that descending bass line, right? We G flat, F, E flat, D flat, so scale degree 1, 7, 6, 5, power of the scale. It's a big thing. So we get chord-wise, to harmonize that, we get our 1 chord, and then we get our 5, 6, 2, 6, 4, 5, 7. And so this is the only thing that's a little unusual in terms of traditional classical harmony, is the 5, 6 to 2, 6, 4. But even that's like not a big deal at all. It's really not that unusual. Actually, I shouldn't even say that. It's not unusual, because the real chord progression is 1, 5. So this goes all the way to this. So 5, 6 to 5, 7, this is just a passing. This is a passing 6, 4 chord. We talk about that in one of the lessons. Passing 6, 4, textbook classical passing 6, 4 chord. So it's 1, 5, 6, passing chord, still staying on 5, just adding a 7th and putting it in a root position. So it's really 1, 5. But we have some variety of chords there to make it a little bit more complex and a little bit more interesting. So that's what we have harmonically. So then Caleb then says that we go, and this is on our chorus, we got our 1 chord. Now, Caleb calls it a 3, 6, 5. And that's not the most insightful way to look at that chord. And let me tell you why. It's not functioning as a 3 chord. And so Caleb uses an uppercase Roman numeral 3 to indicate that it's got a major triad, and then puts a 6, 5 with no M to indicate that it has a minor 7th. So calling it uppercase 3, 6, 5, it's not crazy. Crazier things have been done. You're not, it's reasonable to say that. But what I would really say is that this is a secondary dominant. So I would call it 5, 6, 5 of where we're going, which is a 6 chord. So 5, 6, 5 of 6. So if you listen to the secondary dominant chapter, this is textbook secondary dominant. And then as expected, it goes to that 6 chord. Then here, this E flat 7 over G is another chromatic chord. So this is a chromatic harmony, right? I'm going to put a little star next to it. This is not in the key. This is not in the key, E flat 7 over G. So we get 2 chromatic harmonies. This is, talking about ABBA, which is a pop group, the fact that they're using secondary dominants, not every pop group uses that. And if you were to listen to the top, the top 20 of today's hits, Not all of them are going to be this sophisticated harmonically. Using secondary functions, using a passing 6/4 chord. I mean, for all of us who've done our music theory homework, you know, we can identify with a lot of that stuff. So here, this E flat 7 over G, this is a 5-6-5 going to A flat, which is our 2 chord, 2, and then D flat 7 is again our 5-7. So for our chorus, we get a little secondary functions in there, which kind of adds a whole other aspect to it. So yeah, thank you, thank you. I'm going to go back to the chat, and we're going to come back for more things. I'm trying to melodic solo on guitar. Yeah, so so this is from Eric. You know, improvisation tends to be less melodic than composed melodies. It tends to be a little bit more virtuosic, scalar, arpeggios, and kind of like faster rhythmic note values. And so if we talk about, let's say, whether it be blues improvisation or jazz improvisation or metal guitar solos, if we think of, you know, they tend to have a lot of note, and they tend to be patterns, a lot of scalar and arpeggio patterns, not necessarily melodies. And a melody has a certain amount of rhythmic variety. It has pauses, it has rests. And if you were to think, if you were to, like, let's say, transcribe a B.B. King solo, and B.B. King is more melodic than most, or let's say an Eddie Van Halen solo, or a Charlie Parker solo, you would find more notes than this. You would not find so many kind of longer note values and rest. More than you think, right? More than you would think they have. So like young people who are getting used to improvisation, or not young people who are just learning improvisation, will tend to be like, I am going to play and if you're a guitar player and who doesn't need to breathe, you can just keep going, right? And it tends to not sound melodic. It tends to be too much. So the importance to play melodically. This is why piano players like Keith Jarrett talks about, Keith Jarrett plays soprano saxophone in part so that he can get the idea of breathing when he's playing a piano melody. He doesn't need to breathe when he plays the piano. I mean, he does need to, you know what I mean, right? He needs to breathe, but his melody doesn't need to have a breath. He can keep playing non-stop on the piano without taking a breath. But he wants his piano melodies to feel like they're taking a breath, to feel like a singer or a saxophonist. And so this idea of soloing melodically, a lot of you need to kind of figure out what you're doing, where you need some repetition of melody. So like this, da 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 da, ba da da da, then inversions, ba da da da. You need some longer note values. These are the things you should have in your improvisation. And that's a wonderful challenge to put to yourself. Say, I'm going to improvise with the kind of rhythmical character that's from this ABBA song. Like, give yourself that challenge, and then pick another song and be like, I'm going to improvise rather, with the rhythmic style of this melody. And that's a great exercise. And so a lot of the cool jazz players from like 1949, 1950s, so Miles Davis, Birth of the Cool, Jerry Mulligan, Paul Desmond, these types of jazz players, they didn't play as many fast notes, and they played more melodically in their improvisations. And so it can be done, and it's you know, it's really refreshing. Like, so me, when I play jazz, I like everything, right? So I want the best of everything. I'll typically start my solos very, very melodic, very much in a cool jazz Paul Desmond style, because I love Paul Desmond. And then I'll end with like John Coltrane sheets of sound, because I love that too. So I'm a big fan of the variety of that. But you need to be able to develop, you know, both sides of that. So yeah, good luck with that, Eric. You know, go ahead and try to improvise. Like, here's some chord changes. Go ahead and improvise. Make up your own melody on these chord changes, but try to use this kind of rhythmic feel. So instead of going like, say, let's say you start. I'm doing a terrible job. Let me try that again. So let's say you used to go. Right? So I have a new little phrase. Right? So you're kind of keeping that same idea, but you have a different melodic shape. And then try to figure out how you can like sequence it, repeat it, make it go up, make it go down. Give that challenge to yourself. I think that would be a ton of fun. Carlos, greetings from Greece. Well, I was just talking about ancient Greece, so, and I've never been there. Ooh, good. Big fan from Kansas. Oh, awesome. Thank you, Grant. Here's another question here. Let's see here. Oops, I scrolled down a little bit too quickly. Would you harmonize the C flat in the third measure as D flat 7? I know some would just leave it in a G flat and use it as a passing tone. The C flat in the third measure, 1, 2, the C flat in the third. Oh, okay. So you're counting this as I count this as a pickup. Yeah, this is just a passing tone. So this is all G flat. So let me do that. That's thank you for asking that question, because we have this is on a D flat 7. So chord tone, passing tone, chord tone, escape tone, step out, leap down, chord tone, chord, passing tone, chord tone, and this is kind of like a combination of an anticipation to a neighbor tone. So it's like you could analyze this E flat as a neighbor tone, but because of this dotted 8th 16th, that's kind of like a very characteristic rhythmic device for anticipation. So you could say anticipation neighbor tone, or neighbor. You could just say neighbor tone, but understanding that this feels like this is an anticipation to this, which is a non-chord tone. Neighbor tone, accent and neighbor tone to chord tone. So this is another thing that's, when we're looking at pop music and we're saying, oh, you know, so many people are like, oh, pop music's so simple, and they look down their nose at it. Look at the way the non-chord tones are being used. You know, there's some sophisticated stuff. Like that's you know, it's not super sophisticated, but you know, it's like, okay, we got a note that's not in the chord, that's anticipating another note that's not in the chord, and then resolves right back down. And it's all accented. That stuff gives it some of the emotional juice that this song has. And we're going to talk about that emotional juice in a moment, so don't think I have forgotten. And then we have chord tone. We can call that a passing tone. So 2 passing tones in a row. That's not uncommon when you go from the root to the 5th. And then chord tone. That's an upper neighbor that's kind of like a little bit unprepared because there's the rest, but it's essentially coming from that C flat to the D flat. Chord tone, passing tone, chord tone, chord tone. And then here, chord tone, chord tone, chord tone, anticipation. Chord tone, chord tone, chord tone, chord tone, anticipation again. Chord tone, chord tone, chord tone, chord tone, anticipation. chord, passing tone, chord tone, passing tone, chord tone. So lots of passing tones, a couple accented neighbor tones, an escape tone. Not too bad, right? Not too bad. So when you're composing your melodies, notice the percentage of chord tones to the percentage of non-chord tones. This is another big kind of like melodic, how to write melody, how to analyze a melody tip is you're going to have, just like you're going to have predominantly stepwise motion in your melody with some leaps. I don't know, what are we going to say? Maybe 10% leaps, 15% leaps, something like that. And then for chord tones versus non-chord tones, you're going to have predominantly chord tones and then a certain smaller percentage of non-chord tones. So maybe we're talking about 70% chord tones, maybe 65% chord tones, and then 30% non-chord tones, often passing tones being the most obvious and most kind of like easy on the ear. So that's another way we can analyze all that. Good, 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 good. So yeah, thank you for Flying Crow for asking about non-chord tones. Sounded major. Okay, good. I wish Dr. B was still my theory professor. Hello from Florida. Hey, hello, David. Thank you. Good. You're still tuning in. I appreciate that. Good evening. Thanks for this. You always make my day and motivate me to work. Good. Thank you. I appreciate that. I love achievement. I love achieving great things. I try to do the same for myself. Jeff Jackson, another one of my students, has got another vote for the Beethoven. Oh, it's the people have spoken. I'm gonna have to, hopefully in another 2 weeks. I usually do these videos every 2 weeks on a Saturday, 3 p.m. Eastern time. If everything works out, then who knows? Next might be Beethoven. It might be negative harmony. A lot of that depends on. To be honest, a lot of it depends on how much time I have during the week, and then just where my interests kind of guide me in that for that week. Like, what am I feeling? What am I thinking about? What do I think is going to be valuable to you all? But yes, Beethoven, I love it. David's talking to Nolan. Thank you, giving me good testimonial. Winner Takes It All has a beautiful piano intro. Peter, you're absolutely right, and I haven't played it, and I hesitate to even try to play it here because I'm not a piano player, but it's a great song for piano players. And one of the things that I'm gonna try to play it, and you please will all forgive me if I don't do a great job at it. But what's awesome about the intro is that it starts with a sus4. And then it just kind of has this descending sus4. So it goes sus4 to the 3, kind of then it goes down the scale. And then it does it at each one of these chords. So on the G flat, on the E flat minor, on the A flat minor. And you get this cool, so when you listen to it, you'll hear it, but you get this. It's all these dotted quarter notes starting on beat 2. So what you do is you get quarter rest, you get the kind of get the bass note and the general chord, and then you get this dotted quarter. Let me write it with more traditional B-dum. So dotted quarter, and then a quarter note. So it's 1 bum 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 bum. So 1, 2, and 1, and 4. So you get this cool hemiola syncopation. For those of you not familiar with that word, this is a great word to add to your vocabulary, dealing with a rhythm that's repeats but kind of implies a different, it's almost like this feels like another beat that's different than the actual beat. So it's a rhythmic, syncopated. And so let me try to play that for you again, as you know that. So 1, 2, 3, 4. it's played actually, so it has all these arpeggios, and it just sounds really like, it sounds flowery and elegant. It is a great piano introduction. I agree with you 100%, Peter. What reasoning, so this is from Alexander, what reasoning stands behind your chord progression chart? Are the exceptions what are some, and when might you break them? Yeah, so in my lessons I have the chord progression chart. So really the chord progression chart isn't, let's say, my chord progression chart. This is like what, if we look at the music of Mozart, Beethoven, Haydn, this is what they normally do. This is really what we're looking at. And then there's reasons behind what they normally do. And there's kind of like acoustic, human perception, universal reasons and why they do that. Circle of fifths, things like that. And then there's certain kind of like cultural reasons why there's certain things that work a certain way. The harmonic progression chart is pretty much dealing with a lot of like, if you want harmony that makes it sound like it's moving forward, so like goal-oriented harmony, a moving forward. So you have place of resolution, let's call it our one chord. We then go away, and if we want to feel like we're moving forward back to one, this is the way. This is kind of the harmonic chord progression. So it's taken from the past great composers, and it's dealing with that as kind of like a philosophical, musical philosophical goal, emotional goal. That's what we're trying to look to create with those kind of harmonic progressions. If that's not your goal, then that's not the way you should use harmony. If your goal is to feel like you're just kind of floating in, a water immersion chamber, then those are not the harmonies you want. You want more repetitive harmonies, harmonies that kind of feel like they're shifting like this. Some of the music of like Claude Debussy fits in this category, Eric Satie. So Debussy has a piece called Nuages, and I might be butchering the pronunciation, but it's like clouds. It feels like clouds floating. It doesn't feel like clouds going to, the country dance or whatever. So again, that chart of harmonic progression is for a certain feeling, which was a feeling that was the predominant feeling going for throughout when we talk about Western European art music. Mozart, Beethoven, people like that. So that's a really good question. Are the exceptions what are some, and when might you break the rules? So yeah, there's certainly a lot of ways you can break the rules. I cover some of those in my lesson, so I'm not gonna go into those right now. I apologize. It's a great question, but I want to get back to talking about winner takes it all. But yeah, there are rules about how to break it, and it's really an idea, the concept of these rules, the rules on the chart are dealing with circle of fifths, and you can create other rules, like I mentioned in this, power of the scale, this descending bass line, G flat, F, E flat, D flat. Like you could kind of keep going and use the scale to create all sorts of unusual things. I'm thinking about right now, and I've talked about this in some of my other videos, Luca Marenzio, is an Italian madrigalist from the 16th century who has this super chromatic, these are like super chromatic, and he's going up and down a chromatic scale. Solo a penso, something like that is the name of the piece. But it's just like chromatic scale, and that's what makes the ear follow what's going on, because the chords change so dramatically that you'd be like, this is crazy, what is this? It's insane. Kind of like Carlo Gesualdo is another Italian madrigal composer from the 16th century. But they're using certain things to kind of tie it together. Now, I should let you know that both of these two people I just mentioned are pre-tonal harmony. They are before the major-minor tonality system really comes into existence, is discovered by people like Claudio Monteverdi starts to get into that. And then later on, Johann Sebastian Bach, Antonio Vivaldi. The Baroque composers are really the first using the major-minor tonality system, which is essentially what we still have today. Yes, there's some variations. We get into some modal ideas, like neo-modality, not old modality. It's like modal ideas within a tonal context is kind of what we have now, along with tonality, so mixtures of that. But the Italian madrigalists were pre-major minor tonality. They were really thinking more about melodic lines than harmonies. So from a certain perspective, it's really great to go look at those in the context of what we started today's discussion with, which is how to write melodies. And they were just writing melodies, and they wanted to make sure that the melodies came together in a way that was pleasing, but the Italian madrigal composers were not necessarily concerned, as long as this came together nicely and this came together nicely, they weren't concerned how these two related to each other. And that's really what tonality gets about. It's like this vertical harmony is related to this vertical harmony, is related to this vertical harmony, etc. That's tonality. Whereas the Italian composers were like, we're writing awesome melodies and I want to make sure they line up here. Great. I want to make sure they line up there. End of story. They didn't really necessarily go to like how do these moments where they line up, how do those relate to each other? So that's part of the evolution of music. But you can analyze all these Italian madrigal composers, and they're super complicated type of melodies, very chromatic, rhythmically challenging. They weren't meant for, like a general audience. They were meant for other musicians, other people knowledgeable about music. So they're really, really interesting things. All right. So I kind of answered that question. I know I didn't answer it completely, but hopefully I gave you a little bit of a start on that. All right. All right. Thank you. David played piano for production of Mamma Mia. So super familiar with the song. That's great. Picardy third, can you please explain this compositional device? Yes. Pranav, yeah, this is absolutely big. Let me just put this up because I didn't mention it, and I know we're a little off topic, but that's okay, right? That's how an exciting conversation happens, right? You have a topic, and you kind of get all these interesting. You start making all these interesting connections to other things. So the idea of the Picardy third, I used to always call it the Picardy third. I think it's Picardy third is the right way to say it. So the idea here is that you're in a minor key, C minor, and you end, or you at a cadence, you turn it to C major. And this was common, I forget exactly when this was happening historically. I think pretty early on, 17th century, maybe as early as the 17th century, sometimes in the 18th century for sure. The idea, and it's based on the science, a minor triad is objectively, scientifically, less stable than a major triad. With the way the frequencies interact with each other, it's not as stable. And I do talk about that in one of my lesson videos, but I haven't really gone super in depth into that. But for now, hopefully you can take my word for it. It's less stable, the way the frequencies interact with each other. And the same major triad is more stable. So if you think about what composers would do is they would start a piece in minor, but they would realize that they would like the feeling of having everything feel resolved and figured out. So you might start with the kind of the angst or the drama of a minor key. And then you might want to say, all is right in the world. We've resolved to something more resolved than that minor. And when you do that and end with that major triad, there's this sense of like, and it's the acoustics of the nature of sound combining and meshing up with human psychology, the way we perceive sound. And that we sense that it's greater, it's more resolved. So emotionally we feel like, oh yes, the darkness of the minor, we have to work through things, whether that's work like a fun challenge or a sad challenge. But then when we have that Picardy third resolution to that major triad, the feeling is everything is right with the world. It's gonna be okay. Things are resolved. That's really how it works. and kind of like the function behind it. So you can, usually this happens towards the end of a piece. You usually don't want to go drama, drama, then boom, and then go back to that right away, but you can, right? You can kind of play back and forth with it. So hopefully that explains a bit of how that came to be and how you would utilize that in your own compositions. Got another question here from Caleb here. Dr. B, how do I know if I succeeded in creating a modal chord progression and not a modal chord progression and not a modal one? I'm not quite sure I understand it. For example, a simple 2-chord progression like C minor to D minor is Dorian or Ionian. So let's take that C minor to D minor. So, and let me do contrary motion. So if you're doing C minor to D minor, and this is like the same relationship for a lot of jazz tunes, like So What, which kind of goes from D minor, or D minor to E minor, or John Coltrane's Impressions, same kind of chord progression. It's just up a whole step. So that idea. So if you look at C minor, I would say you're going to go C, E flat. Let me give myself I don't want to erase too much of this stuff. I'm going to erase the hemiola part. You don't need that anymore. I want to give myself a little room here to leave this stuff, because when we go back, because we haven't talked about the lyrics yet. And lyrics are another part of music that I think are absolutely, I mean, I can't think of any music theory book I've read that really discuss lyrics. But certainly songwriting books do. So if we have C minor, C, E flat, G, and then we have D minor, D, F, A, we pretty much have a scale already, right? The only letter missing is a B, right? So chances are, if it's going to be a B flat, and the chord you start with is going to be your tonic. It's going to sound like C as your home base. So if you start with C, so let's say you're going, and then you go to D minor. So it all depends how long you spend on this, right? If you go to D minor and you just shift up. So most typically, it's all, these kind of minor chords are all Dorian, especially for jazz. You just use a Dorian scale. So this would be C minor Dorian, right? And in part because D minor fits in so easily to it already. So you would probably just be doing a Dorian. And if you spend a long time on the C minor, when you shift to D minor, you're just going to move everything up a whole step, and you're going to do D Dorian as well. But if you're going back and forth quickly between C minor and D minor, let's say, then you kind of like combine them if they're coming close together, and you just basically take those two notes, those two chords rather, and say, well, how does that all come into one scale? So Dorian, I think, is the answer, is what you're talking about. So the idea behind modal progressions, the main part of it is that you're couple things. You're changing chords a lot slower. So maybe you might have a chord for 4 measures long or 8 measures long. That's very typical. That's going to sound modal because it's going to be a scale, same scale for that amount of time. If we look at the music of Bach, we have chords changing every beat or every 2 beats. If we look at the music of Mozart, it might be a chord for an entire measure or 2 measures. To get modal, we can expand that out, have a same chord for 4 measures or 8 measures or 16 measures, and that gives it that modal character right off the bat. The other way to kind of give it the modal flavor is to use a chord progression and not raise the leading tone if you're in minor. So if you're in C minor Normally you'd be like, you go to a 4 chord and you go to a 5 chord and you raise the leading tone. You can make that modal by just saying, don't raise the leading tone. And you can just shift using all the different kind of permutations within the scale. This works particularly easy in minor because tonal music raises the leading tone for 5 chords and 7 diminished chords. So when you don't do it, it makes it really, really clear you're thinking in a modal context. To do that in a major key is a little bit more of a challenge. But there's a lot of musical theater composers and Disney composers, and they love using the Lydian mode. So you'll be in major, and everything will sound kind of like kind of normal. Except there, right? So you go 1, 5, and then instead of a minor 2, you get a major 2. So maybe I'll go to a 3 chord. So let's say I'll go 1, 5, then major 2 to 3, make it dark, or maybe I could go to a 6 chord. So yeah, so that would be kind of like that would be an example of a modal progression in major. C, triad, G, D, A minor. And it's this F sharp that gives it a Lydian flavor. So when you want to try to compose modal progression, you pick a mode, try to pick one other than Ionian, because that's the one that's the mode that was... Ionian is the mode that was picked to represent major. So when we have the transition from the Renaissance, 16th century, to the 17th century, and we get the beginning of the Baroque, they basically pick Aeolian as the mode to represent the minor modes, because there was also the option could have been Phrygian. They could have chosen Phrygian, and they could have picked Dorian, but they chose Aeolian as the representative minor mode. And they chose Ionian as the representative for major. They could have chosen Lydian, they could have chosen Mixolydian, but they didn't. They chose Ionian. So if you were to use any of those other ones, for minor, Dorian and Phrygian, and then for major, Lydian or Mixolydian, and you just start writing chords and you make diatonic harmonies that are only using the notes within that mode, you'll have a modal progression, and you can have a lot. Like, this is something that pop music does really well, and you can have a lot of fun with that, right? You can. That's my Lydian modal chord progression, and it gives it something fresh. So Dorian, Phrygian, have fun with those for minor. Lydian, Mixolydian, have fun with those for major. Don't mess with Locrian. Locrian is the 7th mode of the major scale. Don't mess with it. Back in the day, they did not even consider that a real mode. And eventually they were like, okay, it's a theoretical mode. And the reason they didn't really think about that one is because it did not have a perfect 5th, that diminished 5th. So what happens is when we're using these modal progressions, the most important progression can still be there, 5-1, and not necessarily even an uppercase 5, not even a major 5 chord, but this motion of scale degree 5 going down to scale degree 1. It's such a fundamental aspect of harmony, and you can do that with all the modes, and when you're having your modal progressions. So it gives it kind of like the aspects of tonality, but with a little unique coloring. So I could talk a lot more about this, and this is kind of like you got me started, and it's a great topic, but I think I gave you enough to work on in terms of exploring that further. All right. D minor, C, G, G. Is that Dorian? D minor, C, G. Yes, it is. That would be Dorian. So yeah, Caleb. If you went from a D minor triad to C major triad to G major triad, that would be a Dorian progression. All right. All right, so you guys are going back and forth a little with that. That's great. Good, good. I love how you guys are kind of talking amongst each other in the chat. I love it. I love it. I love it. I love it. One of the things that one of my listeners asked me was whether they could start a Facebook fan group that talks about music theory, and I said yeah. And I said if you can structure it in a way where people can ask questions and get feedback from one another, I would totally love that. So he started one up, Dr. B Music Theory fan page, and so. Yeah, if I would love to see if you guys find that useful. Great. If you want to just chat here while these live videos are going, I'm all, my goal is learning more about music. So whatever makes that happen is going to make me happy. Okay. Less ABBA, more Shostakovich and tonal gravity. Yes, Shostakovich, the other end of the emotional spectrum, right? Listen, I want to make everybody happy, so I love me some Shostakovich. Shostakovich cello concerto. I remember when I first discovered his cello concerto and his Fifth Symphony, and then I started listening to all his other symphonies. Woo, that's some tonal gravity is a great way to phrase that. So let's talk about the emotions, because I'm not done with ABBA yet. I want to talk about the words, and I want to talk about the form. So I'm gonna erase the masterpiece. So take a screenshot if you want, or go look at the video. I want to talk a little bit about the lyrics, and then I want to talk first about the form, and then the lyrics, because form is another aspect that people rarely, or music theory gets into, but certainly doesn't get into early, and doesn't examine always in depth as much as it deserves. And form is one of the other areas that, when you're learning how to compose, is often the most overlooked. People look at harmonies and that's usually not a problem. But form is not something that is typically considered. So we have an introduction, and it uses the same chord progressions as the chorus. So that's why I'm going to put intro/chorus. And it's repeated. So it's 8 measures in length, but it's repeated. So 16 measures in total, but it's not 16 measures of all unique material. It's repeated. And at the very end of it, when you repeat it, they add 1 measure. As like a little bit of it has it just floats there for a second, and then the voice comes in. So that's a great trick. Every time you analyze something, say, that's a great trick. How can I use that? So introduction, 8 measures, chugging along, repeat it, chugging along, float for a measure. That gives you a lead in, a little pickup into the first verse. So there you get verse 1. Now verse 1 is 8 measures of material repeated. Kind of just like the same structure as we had here for this intro/chorus. Then we have our chorus, and the chorus is 8 measures of material, but unlike the introduction, it's not repeated. You just have the chorus there. Then we have verse 2. Again, 8 measures repeated. Then we have chorus. We then have the chorus again, or I could put the repeat signs, but I'm going to write it separately. It's like some people might call that a double chorus, or this is maybe a half chorus, and this is the chorus is 16. So whether you're looking at it as the chorus is 16 measures and you get a half chorus first, and then that's the actual chorus is 16, or whether chorus is 8 measures and this is a double chorus, either way, you kind of understand this concept that the first time after the first verse, you get this abbreviated chorus, and then you kind of get it twice. Now the lyrics change, so it's not necessarily a chorus in that. I mean, there's like the words. There is repetition, but there's also some differences. So like you could maybe call it chorus A and chorus B, where the music stays the same, but the lyrics change. So this is not my specialty, so I might be using not the best terminology for all these things. That is quite possible, so forgive me if that's the case. We then get verse 3, which is our 8 measures repeated. We then get our what I'm going to call our double chorus. Then we have our verse 4. I'm running out of room here. I almost wrote verse with a Roman numeral 5. You know you're in music theory. You know you're into music theory when you write your V's like an uppercase Roman numeral 5. That sounds like a meme. Verse 4. There, and then I'm going to move it over here so I give myself a little room. Then we have chorus, which is kind of like the ending version, which is another variation of that chorus. And then we basically have the intro, again, which is our chorus, intro / chorus, the instrumental, and that is 8 measures repeated. This one is 8 measures. So there we go. That's our form. Now let me just kind of talk about the lyrics. So first verse. I don't want to talk about things we've gone through, but it's hurting me. Now it's history. I've played all my cards, and that's what you've done too. Nothing more to say. No more ace to play. That's your first verse. Then the winner takes it all. The loser's standing small beside the victory. That's her destiny. Am I in the right keys? No, I'm not. I shifted. All right. So then the winner takes it all. The loser standing small beside the victory. That's her destiny. So this song is kind of like, if you think about what makes these lyrics interesting, is you have this with that leap, and this is where I think the lyrics are the most interesting. We have the winner takes it all, the loser standing small beside the victory. That's her destiny. That's what happens the first time, and you know it's this emotional. The words and the music with that leap. The winner takes it all. The loser, like it's like winners, losers. Like this is not what I love in life is win-win situations. This is not one of those. And I'm sure some of us have been in that place and we felt that where someone wins and because they win, you lose. It's not a nice feeling. It's not a feeling that's particularly enjoyable. And so what's interesting is as that kind of like maybe we call this like, you know, we are going to hear this, the winner takes it all again in the same spot, but there is another version when we get to chorus 2, lyric-wise, and it goes like this. And this is the one that like I think really brings home some of the emotional flavor of what this melody does. And the reason I'm talking about these lyrics is, you know, when we're talking about music and then emotion, because we know music creates emotions, it's very abstract. And when we look at the lyrics, if the lyrics have the same emotion as the music, which is what normally happens, not always. Sometimes you have like kind of like irony in music where the music has a certain feeling that's different than the lyrics, and that gives a whole other shade of complexity to the overall emotional meaning. So just think about like a happy song that's played in a minor key, or a sad song that's played in a major key. You get these like complexities of emotion, and right it's like over 6,000 words in the English dictionary for emotions that human beings feel. Right, 6,000. Most of us have a hard time keeping track of 10 different emotions that we feel throughout the course of a day, but there's that many different words that talk about the differences that sometimes very subtle. So looking at the lyrics can give us an insight into how this leap in the chorus feels. So let me give you another one, and there's a couple different ones, so we get a different take and different flavor of that ascending leap and what it means. So the next one is, the gods may throw a dice, their minds as cold as ice, and someone way down here loses someone dear. Woo! That is heavy stuff, right? That's like you feel like a victim. You know, there's gods up there. Minds as cold as ice, meaning uncaring. They don't care about you. They throw a dice, random. They're not even singling you out whether you did something good or bad. It's just bad luck. And the gods decide, and someone down here, someone you care about, you lose them. Man, that's a heavy emotion, right? You know, ABBA as a pop group tends to be more upbeat, happy music because, you know, most people want to feel happy. I want to feel happy, right? But every now and then they had a song that was like, you know, ooh, really, really gets you. And to add to the poignancy of that is ABBA was a group that had two married couples. There was a guy married to a female singer, another guy married to another female singer. Both, as they became popular and had more and more success, there were strains on both of those relationships. They both ended up getting divorced. And so one of the couple got divorced and was reasonably amicable, and they wrote this song about the divorce. And at that same time they're writing the song, the other couple is like having a not amicable hard time that is going to end in divorce a little bit down the road. So this is all about romantic love, things not working out, feeling helpless. That's kind of what that gets in there. And let me give you another set of lyrics here to kind of like bring home what I'm talking about feeling helpless. And think about how this melody, the rhythms, the harmonies, the melodic shape, how that reinforces these feelings or supports those feelings. So, the judges will decide, the likes of me abide, spectators of the show, always staying low, right? The judges will decide, the likes of me abide, meaning like they decide, I just have to follow along. Spectators of the show, so you're not in control of your life, you're just a spectator. You know, like, oh man, talk about, you know, feeling like you don't have control of your own life, of what you want, what's going to make you happy. There's these gods, there's these judges. You just have to go along with it. Man, talk about capturing an emotional feeling. So I think we did some real deep diving here into analyzing melody, and not only analyzing the melody, but how the harmonies might support that, how lyrics might play in there. And that's, you know, there's a lot more I could talk about, and probably should talk about in terms of how a melody, you know, it's like music is so hard, right? Because it's so abstract. It's like, you know, and from one's perspective, you're like, how is it that these frequencies that vibrate at different speeds make me feel stuff, right? It's not necessarily obvious why that would happen. Why would certain sounds vibrating at different frequencies coming together with different sounds with different frequencies, how that would make people feel stuff? And so it's so abstract. But when we're looking at music, you know, one, we can listen and absorb lots of music, and we can just use our instincts, and not really instincts, but we can use that knowledge and information that's sunk into our, like we can listen to the music, we can feel it, it can sink into our subconscious, and then we can use that to become great composers. But if we can do that and get an analytical side to it, like not analyze and like lose that feel for it, whether we're listening and using our emotions and our ears, but combine that with a certain analytical thing, we can speed up that process of us really understanding it and being able to control those elements and write music for ourselves or analyze music and really say, well, look at how that melody, that leap, how that creates this certain kind of void sonic void, and there's like this, the lyrics are all about this void inside someone's soul, as they lost someone that they loved, and obviously worked with closely in the case of the group ABBA. We're talking about people who loved each other, and like their whole career, it was like they were around each other all the time. And when that is gone or is over, what does that feel like? So thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed that, and you can certainly apply a lot of this information to any song, even Beethoven, which is going to be a lot of fun to do. So let's take a look. I'm going to go back here. I got a request. Can you think of starting a series or channel on orchestration? You're not the first to ask. I've absolutely thought about it. I've been joking. I just need to get fired from my job. That's all that needs to happen. And then I'll be able to do my music history series, my orchestration. Like I have so many ideas that I would love to do. And I plan to do them. It's time is such a precious commodity, so that's why I always try to prioritize, take care of myself, so that I'm healthy and have my energy, so I can be doing all those things. I would love to do a series on orchestration, so it's in the works. Thank you and I appreciate when you make the request. If I hear that request over and over and over again, it just keeps moving things up the priority list for me in terms of what I'm going to do next, in terms of what the next project is. So yeah. I would love to do that. All right. All right. What do we have next? It's like a waltz number 2. Okay. Dave asks, are we sure this theory isn't racist? Yes. Yes, we are sure. So there's and I'm not quite sure which exact theory you're talking about, but I know that there's been some YouTube things about like music theory is white supremacy, or is music theory racist? The answer is no, it's not. Music theory is talking about studying music, like I've said before, from a scientific perspective, meaning acoustics, and there's a science behind that that's independent of whatever race or culture you're coming from. And it's also talking about a specific culture. Now, to talk about a specific culture, and in this case Western European, is not racist. We can also, different countries are going to talk about different cultures. So in India, they're going to talk a lot more about Indian music. And we're not going to say, oh, they shouldn't be talking about music from their culture. Of course they should. They should talk about that. And at no point necessarily what I think would be racist would be to simply say that this is that only one culture produced music that's of any value, and all other cultures have no musical value worth studying. That would be racist. But that's not what music theory says, and that's certainly not what's being said with any of the theories I've talked about. What I'm saying is that every culture, both from a musical standpoint and others, has things that are awesome about it and things that are not awesome about it. Every culture, right? And our jobs as scholars, as lovers of music theory, is to take everything of value we can find from as many sources as possible. And certainly when, it's the idea of knowing the culture that's surrounding you and understanding it is important. I mean, I've seen some of those late night TV shows where, whether it's Conan O'Brien or Jay Leno or Jimmy Fallon or whatever, they go and they interview like an American in the streets, and they ask them some like really basic thing about American history, and the person doesn't know anything, and everyone at home's going like, oh my God, this person's so ignorant. That's a bad thing. And so I think that when we're talking about music theory here, we're talking about Western European art music theory. We should know about this. We should know about the music of Mozart, the music of Haydn, the music of Beethoven. These are geniuses from a specific culture whose music has withstood the test time and has influenced so much of the music that's going on, both in this culture and in other cultures. by no means does that mean that we're not gonna talk about other areas. I'm not an expert in every area, and I haven't studied them all. I mentioned in my last video how I was looking at Indian music and investigating that, and I found it super interesting. I was living in the East Village, New York City, and so they had all the Indian restaurants in the East Village, and I loved it. I was like, oh, tabla, sitar, and then I was like, oh, that's North Indian music, and oh, there's this South Indian music, and I loved experiencing it. But I remember at a certain point in my studying, and I was doing this on my own, I'm going to a concert, and I remember thinking to myself, and I said to myself, I think I understand everything I can about this music without someone teaching me about the culture, right? So there was a universal aspect for that music that I could understand and I could appreciate. And there was also a cultural aspect where I was just not familiar enough with Indian culture, especially South Indian culture, to really understand everything that was going on in the music. And that makes sense. And that's totally fine. So that's how I would quickly respond to that question. And I think, obviously there's a rich conversation that can be had to kind of understand and really understand, like when you're talking about theories and racism, like racist is a word that's used so broadly in our time right now. So it's, what are we really talking about when we say that? And should it be as broad as people are using it today? Or does it really belong to talking about, well, what are we specifically talking about? What, it's like words are meant to help us think and understand concepts. So they need to apply to something specific. They can't be so broad that, everything falls into that category or too many things fall into that category. So that it's a great conversation and certainly one that I imagine I will be having with other music theory people and other scholars and people in academia. This is certainly a conversation that is underway. All right. About soloing, here's another one about soloing over modal progression. What's the best approach, to just focus on the mode or try to do arpeggios over the changes? I feel like doing arpeggios over the changes. So for soloing for modal changes, and let me answer that question. Improvising over modal changes. So there's a couple little things that you can work on. There's scale patterns and there's arpeggios. So if we were to take our C, D, E flat, F, G, A, B flat as our mode, right? A Dorian mode. Anything like just running up and down scales, as we talked about with our melody, gets boring quick. So maybe a pattern, right? So C, D, E flat, D. So ba da 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 da. So you could do something like that. You could do it like a little scale pattern. You could do arpeggio patterns where you go, and let's say you so here's your 4-note pattern, right? You go, oh, I moved out of Dorian, and I didn't do Dorian at all, because this would be A. I did a bad job of being Dorian. Right? You can kind of develop little patterns that deal with arpeggios. That's a great way to do it. So scales, triadic arpeggios, and then the other thing is that works really well is doing things in fourths. So C, F, B flat. So let's say you go, and then you go, that's a 3-note cell, then D, G, C is another 3-note cell. And the fourth will generally be perfect, but then every now and then it's going to become a an augmented fourth. So you get, and that's very common for kind of like a jazz. So you, and so sometimes like John Coltrane would use this kind of like chordal harmony. Joe Henderson is another jazz. These are jazz saxophonists, but it's not unique to jazz. It doesn't have to be. You can certainly do all of this stuff in different styles as well. So that's, you know, scales, scale patterns, arpeggio patterns, and then chordal, kind of like doing things in fourths. That's what I would recommend as a place to start in terms of really getting into improvising over modal progressions. Oh, so Caleb did say he got the feeling the song was about a divorce. All right, good. I'm glad you agree with me on that one. I saved someone's music theory. Excellent. Here's a question from Carlos. Could you give me some leads to learn some harmonic techniques to sound dark and aggressive? Well, have you seen my demonic progression video yet? I gave you my favorite demonic progression, and so I'll give you the quick version of it, and you can look that up if you haven't, and then I'll give you a few other things. Dark progressions, like you certainly got minor as a way to get kind of dark, and you get chromaticism. But again, it's like that's like scratching the surface. You know, it's certainly more than that. So my progression, my demonic progression is that's essentially it. So let me oh, wait a minute, I didn't do that right. So there's my harmonic progression that I think is super dark. Right? The sonority of a minor triad with a major seven is dark all by itself. So minor triad with a major seven. And so when we look at seventh chords, when you're first learning seventh chords, there's really only 5 types that are really common. Major triad with a major seven, major triad with a minor seven, minor triad with a minor seven, diminished triad with a minor, diminished triad with a minor seven, diminished triad with a diminished seven. So like C major seven, C7, C minor 7, C half diminished 7, C diminished 7. Those are the 5 common 7th chord types. But minor triad with a major 7 is possible. It's just not as common. And so what I do is a sequence all with root movement. So what happens is the upper part of a minor major 7 is an augmented triad. So you get augmented triads going down by half step chromatically down by half step. Well, you have these chromatic third these up by minor thirds in the bass. So on top we have augmented triads descending by half step, and in the bass we have. It's kind of like it's kind of like in tritone substitutions where the third and the seventh flip-flop every other chord. So what happens is that the the note, it's not like this is the third to the third to the third to the third. It's like it goes from third, becomes the seventh, comes the fifth, goes back to being the third. So it's kind of like it transforms. And so if you know about tritone substitutions, let's say C7 and F sharp 7, the third of a C7 is an E, and the seventh is a B flat. In an F sharp 7, the third is an A sharp, which is enharmonically the same as a B flat, and the seventh is an E. But the roots change by a tritone. So C7, F sharp 7, right? Third becomes the seventh, seventh becomes the third. So if you want to get dark, that tritone is also going to be helpful, right? We talked. So this is what's called the tritone substitution, and this is a progression, and you can see how I'm dealing with more dissonant seventh chords than your standard 5, and I'm using these augmented triads, so I'm using chromaticism in there as well. Those are some of the ways and some of the things that you can certainly start experimenting with to get kind of like these more darker. And when we say dark, we're kind of talking emotionally. The kind of feelings is like there's a certain there's a tension, there's a muscular strength, tension to it. There's like anger, there's frustration. What we would call some of these darker emotions. Now, I am looking at the time, and I'm getting a little concerned that my remote batteries are going to be dying soon. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about this, and then I'm going to glance here at the chat and see if I can get to some more questions. So dark, aggressive, minor, chromaticism, tritones. Think about the group Rush. I don't even remember the name of that song. It's like YYZ or something. It's not that, but it's the group Rush. Has a great thing using the tritone. Those are your dissonant intervals. So what you're doing when you want to explore more dark, aggressive things is you're taking the balance between consonants and dissonance and you're putting it more on the dissonant side, right? So we know minor has a little bit more dissonance than major. We know chromaticism by its nature is more dissonance, and the tritone is a dissonant interval. So looking at your dissonant intervals, so you can do it from an intervallic standpoint, have more dissonance. You can do it from a chord standpoint, more dissonance. The other aspect is going to certainly be rhythmically, right? So and to a certain extent dynamically, right? If you play loud, that'll do a lot, right? And part of guitarists, here's where guitarists can kind of, I don't know if the word cheat is correct, but a guitarist can take their amp and go super loud, right? Like they don't have to be good at their instrument at all. They can turn the volume up all the way. They can get a certain level of intensity, darkness, aggressive quality just by sheer volume, right? The other way is like using distortion on a guitar, which creates a certain, like taking away from the pitch side and introducing a more noise kind of aspect to that. That's what distortion does. It also can make things sound aggressive. So there's timbral ways to do it, right? So timbral is dealing with if you're playing guitar, use some distortion. If you're like me playing saxophone, growl. So you can kind of hum, growl at the same time you play a note, and it makes it all kind of like, It gets a bit more of a noise aspect into it. So it's pitch plus noise, loud. So the rhythms can tend to be more short and repeated. So think about like Igor Stravinsky, The Rite of Spring, where you have this. So there's all these short notes. The whole chord's being repeated, and every now and then there's a loud accent that's unexpected. So rhythmically, that's how you would do that. Your intervals that are going to be most dissonant are going to be your seconds, major second, minor second, major 7, minor 7, and then your tritone, your interval of a tritone. So you can play around with those intervals to get certain dark, more aggressive things. And then chord-wise, exploring, like, so your diminished triad and your augmented triad. But 7th chord-wise, your diminished 7 is pretty has a little bit more dark. Though at this point it's you know, it's like the old black and white films where you have the lady tied to the train tracks. That can actually come a little cliche, but if you want to figure out how to use diminished 7 chords in a non-cliche way, you can listen to Ludwig van Beethoven. He certainly does a great job with diminished 7 chords, making them sound kind of aggressive and a little bit darker. But then you can explore things like other type of chords, like major triad, augmented triad with a major 7. That's a really cool sonority, kind of like the minor triad with a minor triad with a major 7. How about an augmented triad with a major 7? So. So play around with that. Minor triad with a major 7, augmented triad with a major 7. And then the last thing I'm going to give you in terms of harmonic material, and this is just a little taste, right? Little taste, because is polychords. So you have a triad on top and then a foreign bass note underneath. So we've talked about, if we have a C major triad in first inversion, C with E in the bass, or C with G in the bass. So C major triad in first inversion, C major triad in second inversion, right? So we have a triad and a note that's not the root in the bass. So this is like level 1 super consonant, right? Now, let me give you the next level. A triad with a note that's not in the chord in the bass, but that is in the key. So let's say C over D, which is really or let's say C over F, which is really a little bit mistaken because this is just like a major 7. Right? So that doesn't quite count. I'm going to go like that. Let's say and C over A doesn't quite count either, because that's just really that would be A minor 7. I'm going to use some different colors so this stands out. So again, I want to be as clear as possible. So C with A in the bass is really going to sound like an A minor 7. C with F in the bass is really going to sound, oh no, that's not a major 7. I'm mistaken. That's totally legit. That totally works. So C with F. So this one doesn't work so well. So let me play for you what we're talking about here. What I'm talking about here. So C major triad. These can sound like this is another whole area of harmonic, and this is done in other styles of music other than what we've been talking about a lot. So popular music, a lot of guitar music, jazz, other styles, they'll use this kind of stuff where it's kind of like diatonic, in a certain sense modal, where you're just taking a chord from the key, let's say our key is C major, and we're just kind of like just keep that D and we just move the D up, or we're, let's say, from C to F, you know, C major in root position to C over F. F is not in the C chord, C, E, G, so, but it is in the key. You can also be like putting a D in the bass. So you can mix those in with otherwise tonal harmony, or you can kind of just explore those. The next kind of level is where it's really, really dissonant, or notes that are definitely outside the key. So like C with F sharp in the bass would be an example of that. So you have or C with D flat in the bass. Here's the F sharp. So what this does is it, and again this is triad with a bass note. What this does, this is where you can, if you want to get more dark and aggressive, get and explore this area. And just go ahead and go through the whole chromatic scale, right? Say, I'm going to play a C major triad with C in the bass. Well, that's just a C major triad. That's very consonant. How about with a C sharp or D flat? That's pretty dark and aggressive. With a D, that's more in this kind of middle area. Not super dark and aggressive, but a little bit more dissonant. With an E flat would certainly count. C with E flat in the bass, because we get the E flat versus the E natural there. C with E in the bass, well, that's just an inversion. C with F in the bass, that's kind of our diatonic modal flavor. C with F sharp in the bass, that gets into our dark area. C with G in the bass, that's just an inversion. C with A flat, this is the same as the A flat major 7 sharp 5, which is one of the other sonorities that I told you to explore. But that would count as well. C with an A in the bass, that's kind of in this area, but it's also just a A minor 7. C with B flat in the bass. This sounds like essentially like a C7. Same thing as the C7, but with in first inversion. C with B in the bass, that's pretty dissonant. So we're when we get those dissonances, what's causing that is the half step. So here it's the B versus the C that creates that real dissonance. Here it's the A flat versus the G. There's your dissonance. Here it's the E flat versus the E. Here it's the D flat versus the C. Here it's the F sharp versus the G. Now that's not the only dissonance in all the cases, but that half step dissonance is certainly a big part of what makes it sound kind of more aggressive and darker. So right there, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 harmonies for you to explore. How's that for you? All right. Yeah, so Caleb gives some opportunities, good suggestions as well. But I gave you like this is like a whole next level harmonic concept thing, and I kind of feel bad that I'm just giving you like just throwing at you and not giving you any insight into like how you would use it, what kind of scales would you use. But that might be something for another video. But I'm just throwing those at you at things that you can experiment with. All right, folks, I think I'm gonna wrap it up because we had a good 2 hours, folks. And so for those of you who are here for the full time, thank you very much. For those of you watching after the fact, please give me a thumbs up if you liked it, subscribe, and share with anyone who you think would enjoy learning more about music theory. Thanks, everyone. I hope to see you in 2 weeks. Be well.